In 1870, a quiet, disciplined man from Cleveland held a sliver of America's oil business, just 4% of the country's refining power. 10 years later, that same man controlled 90%. By 1904, his grip was almost total. 91% of refining, 85% of end product sales, and a level of industrial dominance the world had never seen before. His name was John D. Rockefeller. And what he created wasn't just an oil empire. It was the operating system of modern corporate power. Standard Oil may have been forced apart in 1911, but the machinery he engineered didn't vanish. It reproduced, it mutated, and it's the template for the system running your life in 2025. Every product you touch, fuel, pharmaceuticals, food, tech platforms, banking, operates on Rockefeller's blueprint. Vertical integration, horizontal consolidation, captured regulators, tax-sheltered philanthropy that shapes national policy, market dominance so overwhelming that competition isn't defeated, it simply stops being possible. Rockefeller didn't just dominate oil, he built the architecture of corporate control itself, and you don't escape a building by pretending it isn't there. You escape by understanding the blueprint. Every powerful company today, Amazon, Google, Pfizer, JP Morgan, follows the same four-step system he perfected. Control the supply chain. Crush rivals or absorb them. Influence the rule makers. Use philanthropy to sanctify the empire. And if the government ever steps in, make sure the breakup enriches you even more. But to understand how he built this machine, you have to look at where he came from. John Davidson Rockefeller entered the world on July 8, 1839, in rural New York. His upbringing reads like the origin story of a man built for contradiction. His father was Devil Bill, a traveling trickster who sold fake cancer cures and carried multiple identities. His mother was a fiercely religious Baptist who taught frugality, discipline, and moral conviction. Rockefeller grew up absorbing both extremes. From his father, he learned cold-blooded calculation. From his mother, an unwavering belief that his order, was righteous. Later in life, when people accused him of ruthless behavior, he didn't flinch. In his mind, God gave me my money, and he was simply managing industry the way a divinely chosen steward should. Then came 1859. Oil was struck in Titusville, Pennsylvania, unleashing one of the wildest economic frenzies in American history. Thousands rushed into western Pennsylvania, chasing riches. It was madness, prices swinging violently, wells drying up overnight, speculation everywhere. Most people saw chaos. Rockefeller saw the pattern beneath the noise. At age 20, working as a meticulous bookkeeper in Cleveland, he recognized something others ignored. Drilling was a gamble, but refining, turning crude into kerosene, was predictable, measurable, scalable. That was the real business. In 1863, he bet $4,000 on his first refinery. Within 2 years, it was Cleveland's biggest. But that wasn't enough. Cleveland had about 30 refineries, all fighting for survival with razor-thin margins. This is where Rockefeller's mind separated from everyone else's. He had no interest in joining a crowded race. He wanted to end the race entirely. He built his advantage through a method that would later define corporate America: vertical integration. While competitors focused on a single stage, buy crude, refine it, sell it, Rockefeller plotted to own every link in the chain. He purchased the barrel factories so he didn't depend on suppliers. He bought the tank cars so no railroad could squeeze him. He built warehouses, secured distribution lines, and negotiated secret deals that made railroads refund money to him while charging his rivals extra. Every step became internal, efficient, and ruthlessly optimized. The result was simple. He could produce cheaper than anyone in the country. If a competitor paid 25 cents for a barrel, Rockefeller made one for 15. If they paid freight costs, Rockefeller often got paid by the railroads. With that advantage, he could drop prices below cost, bleed rivals dry, and still make money. Efficiency became a weapon. By 1870, he formalized everything into Standard Oil of Ohio, already the largest refining business on Earth. But he still controlled only 4% of the U.S. industry. Rockefeller wasn't satisfied. He didn't want dominance. He wanted inevitability, which led to phase 2 of his strategy: horizontal integration. Buy or break every competitor. And what happened next would enter the history books under a brutal name: the Cleveland Massacre. Rockefeller's campaign to eliminate competition didn't unfold slowly. It detonated. In 1872, he initiated what historians later named the Cleveland Massacre, a phrase that almost understates how methodical it really was. Over just 3 months, he visited every refinery owner in Cleveland with a simple ultimatum disguised as a polite business offer: sell your refinery to Standard Oil at a fair price, or be financially erased. If an owner accepted, Rockefeller often kept them on as managers. He liked turning defeated rivals into obedient operators. If they refused, he unleashed the price war. He would drop kerosene prices so low that competitors lost money with every gallon sold. They couldn't match his efficiency, his shipping rates, or his secret rebates. They either bent or broke. By the end of those 3 months, Rockefeller controlled 25 out of Cleveland's 26 refineries. In the span of 1 season, he turned a competitive city into a one-man empire. But Cleveland was just step 1. Throughout the 1870s, he replicated the same pattern across the country: New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Baltimore. His rivals were scattered, undercapitalized, and playing by the assumptions of traditional business. Rockefeller played by none of them. He had already internalized what he would later summarize as a philosophy: the day of combination is here to stay. When people accused him of destroying competitors, he would calmly reply that he was simply bringing order to chaos. In his mind, he was saving the industry from its own inefficiency. By 1879, Standard Oil controlled 90% of U.S. refining capacity. 90%. No company in American history had ever reached that level of control so quickly. And yet, Rockefeller wasn't marveling at his own success. He was preparing for the next threat. Because with dominance comes visibility, and with visibility comes hatred. The public loathed him. Journalists called him the Anaconda, the Lord of the Universe, the most hated man in America. Ordinary citizens saw the absurd inequality: one man building a fortune the size of nations, while small refineries were wiped off the map. And in Washington, lawmakers noticed too. To them, Standard Oil was no longer a business. It was a sovereign power. In 1890, Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, the first major law designed to break monopolies. The law basically said, you can't control an entire industry. Rockefeller understood instantly what was coming. But instead of fighting the law, he adapted around it, and that adaptation would reshape the structure of every major corporation for the next 150 years. In 1882, even before Sherman was enforced, Rockefeller's lawyers constructed something radically new: the Standard Oil Trust. A trust wasn't a company. It wasn't even one legal entity. It was a structure, an umbrella, under which multiple companies could exist as separate units while being secretly controlled by the same group of trustees. Standard Oil of Ohio could not legally own companies in other states, but the trust could own everything. 41 shareholders, almost all loyal to Rockefeller, held all the voting power. So on paper, Standard Oil complied with state laws. In reality, Rockefeller still ran a nationwide monopoly from a single centralized control room. This was the birth of the modern holding company. Berkshire Hathaway, Alphabet, Meta? Every conglomerate today traces its structure to Rockefeller's lawyers in 1882. The trust turned Rockefeller from a monopolist into something more sophisticated, an empire manager. By 1904, the trust had expanded into near absolute dominance. 91% of refining, 85% of final sales. Rockefeller was the wealthiest human being on Earth by a margin that's hard to comprehend. His net worth hit $900 million, which would be about $25 billion today. But that's not even close to his real peak. After further inflation adjustments and recalculations of his proportional control of the U.S. economy, historians estimate Rockefeller's peak wealth at roughly $400 billion in today's dollars, more than Bezos, Musk, and Gates combined. And unlike today's billionaires, Rockefeller didn't rely on stock bubbles, tech booms, or hype cycles. His wealth came from control, direct, structural, unavoidable control. But the public wasn't finished with him. In 1906, investigative journalist Ida Tarbell published a scathing expose on Standard Oil's tactics. Tarbell had a personal motive. Standard Oil had destroyed her father's refinery years earlier, but she backed her story with meticulous documentation. Secret rebates, predatory pricing, fake companies, false partnerships, political manipulation. Her work sparked outrage across the country. By 1911, the Supreme Court ruled Standard Oil an illegal monopoly and ordered it broken into 34 companies. The newspapers celebrated. Politicians bragged. Many believed they had finally defeated Rockefeller, but they misunderstood the game. When Standard Oil split, Rockefeller didn't lose control. He multiplied it. He owned shares in all 34 companies, and once those companies were forced to operate independently, competition made them more efficient, more innovative, and ultimately more valuable. The combined worth of the 34 pieces more than tripled the value of the original Standard Oil stock. Rockefeller, the man they tried to destroy, became wealthier than ever. Over the next century, those same 34 companies quietly began merging back together. Standard Oil of New Jersey became Exxon. Standard Oil of New York became Mobil. Standard Oil of California grew into Chevron. BP absorbed Standard Oil of Ohio. By the late 20th century, the broken monopoly had reassembled itself into three global giants: ExxonMobil, Chevron, and BP. Exactly the type of oligopoly Rockefeller himself would have designed. And all the while, Rockefeller was building something even more durable than oil companies: foundations, institutions, universities, medical models, and tax-advantaged structures that would allow his influence to outlive his body. Philanthropy was his final strategic weapon. By the time the 20th century matured, Rockefeller's oil octopus had already reshaped industrial America. But what most people missed, what most still miss, is that the breakup didn't destroy the system. It freed it. His methods escaped into the bloodstream of capitalism itself. Every powerful corporation you deal with today is, in some form, a descendant of Rockefeller's architecture. They aren't copying him because they admire him. They copy him because his system works with terrifying reliability. Take Amazon. On the surface, it's a tech company. But structurally, it's Rockefeller with a website. Amazon began with books the same way Rockefeller began with kerosene. A foothold in an industry full of inefficiencies. Year by year, Bezos followed the same vertical integration formula. Control the warehouses. Control the logistics. Control the shipping trucks. Control the payment rails. Control the cloud servers that competitors rely on. Amazon Web Services alone produces nearly $90 billion annually, dwarfing the profit of its retail division. Rockefeller would have admired this deeply, making more money from the infrastructure beneath competitors than the products sold directly to customers. Just like Rockefeller used railroads against his rivals, Amazon uses its marketplace. Every third-party seller unknowingly hands Amazon its sales data. Amazon studies the data, identifies winning products, clones them under the Amazon Basics label, then boosts those copies above the originals. It's the digital age version of a price war. Legal, subtle, devastating. Sellers complain that Amazon is simultaneously the platform, the competitor, the regulator, and the judge. That's vertical and horizontal control fused into one, exactly what Standard Oil pioneered. Google operates on Rockefeller's trust model with surgical precision. Alphabet, its parent company, doesn't do business the way Google Search or YouTube does. Alphabet is a holding company, just like the Standard Oil Trust. It owns autonomous subsidiaries: Google, YouTube, DeepMind, Waymo, Verily, and dozens more. This setup lets Alphabet shift profits across borders, isolate legal liability, and complicate regulatory intervention. Regulators can force one division to change, but the holding company remains intact, impenetrable. Rockefeller understood this structure in 1882. Google perfected it in the 2000s. Pharmaceutical giants mirror another part of Rockefeller's system: regulatory capture. Rockefeller didn't just compete in markets. He shaped the rules governing them. He lobbied for safety standards only his refineries could meet. He influenced railroad rates to give Standard Oil secret advantages. Today, pharmaceutical companies follow the same script. They fund the FDA through user fees, lobby for patent extensions that block generics, and draft legislation that lawmakers barely read before signing. Pfizer, Merck, Johnson & Johnson, they don't just operate in medicine. They operate in the legal code that governs medicine. This is Rockefeller's system translated into modern law. And then there's banking. JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Citigroup. They're not single banks. They're holding company networks sprawled across dozens of subsidiaries. This structure allows them to offload risk, dodge specific regulations, and create layers of complexity that lawmakers can barely untangle. After the 2008 financial crisis, regulators tried to tighten the rules, but they faced the same problem regulators confronted in 1911. Who do you regulate? The parent or the dozens of corporate children beneath it? Rockefeller solved that problem in the 19th century. Banks recycled his solution in the 21st. But perhaps the most misunderstood piece of Rockefeller's system is philanthropy. In 1913, he created the Rockefeller Foundation with $250 million, around $7 billion today. The public saw a titan of industry giving back. But philanthropy served three purposes: tax minimization, legacy protection, and influence. Under the foundation umbrella, Rockefeller could direct funding toward universities, research labs, and medical schools, shaping not just public perception, but entire academic fields. The Flexner Report, funded by Rockefeller, redefined American medical education around pharmaceutical treatments rather than holistic care. This isn't conspiracy, it's historical fact. When a foundation funds the institutions that certify doctors, it shapes what doctors learn. And when major pharmaceutical companies later emerged, many originating from Standard Oil's chemical divisions, they benefited from a system tilted toward their products. Fast forward to today. Bill Gates mastered the philanthropic game that Rockefeller invented. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has over $75 billion in assets and shapes global health policy, vaccination programs, and government decisions worldwide. Warren Buffett channels the majority of his wealth into Gates's foundation. Mark Zuckerberg created the Chan-Zuckerberg Initiative, structured as an LLC so it can donate, lobby, or invest without the restrictions normal charities face. Philanthropy today is policymaking under softer branding. Rockefeller built the template. Silicon Valley scaled it. Meanwhile, the Rockefeller family never disappeared. David Rockefeller, John D's grandson, became one of the most influential figures in 20th century global finance. He chaired Chase Manhattan, co-founded the Trilateral Commission, influenced presidents, and quietly shaped foreign policy for decades. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund and Rockefeller Family Fund still influence environmental policy, education, and political movements. And here's the part most people never realize. The system is invisible by design. You buy gasoline from ExxonMobil or Chevron, companies descended from Standard Oil. You buy on Amazon, which uses Standard Oil's integration strategy. You search on Google, whose trust structure traces back to Rockefeller's lawyers. You take pharmaceuticals developed in a medical system shaped by the Rockefeller Foundation. You bank at institutions that use the corporate architecture he invented. Every step feels like a choice, but the choices lead to the same structure, one that extracts wealth from the bottom and concentrates it at the top. Not through conspiracy, but through design, through efficiency, through a system built 150 years ago that never stopped expanding. And the more you understand this architecture, the more you begin to see the mechanism beneath it. A mechanism that doesn't just shape industries, it shapes your life. Once you understand the architecture, the next question hits you harder than the history itself. How does this system actually extract wealth from you? Not in theory, not metaphorically, but in the day-to-day reality you live inside without noticing. Rockefeller's brilliance wasn't just that he built a monopoly. It was that he built a mechanism so tightly interlocked that escaping it feels like trying to outrun your own shadow. Start with something basic: gasoline. You walk up to the pump thinking you're choosing between Exxon, Chevron, BP, Shell. But these aren't truly separate entities. They're oligopolies carved from the same trunk, operating within the same pricing band, shaped by the same vertical integration, and descended either directly or architecturally from Standard Oil. You're not choosing. You're selecting which branch of Rockefeller's family tree you want pumping into your tank. Then move to everyday consumption. Amazon, Walmart, Target. Amazon bends the supply chain so far in its favor that competitors have to adopt versions of the same structure or die. Walmart builds its own hyper-efficient logistics network. Target imitates Amazon's delivery infrastructure. The names are different, but the logic is identical. Control every step, squeeze suppliers, eliminate waste, concentrate power. Look at the digital world. Internet search, 92% goes through Google. That's a higher peak than Standard Oil ever achieved. But Google avoids the monopoly label because it charges nothing up front. You pay with data, attention, and behavioral patterns that Google monetizes at a scale Rockefeller would have admired. Rockefeller lowered the price of kerosene to annihilate competitors. Google lowered the price of search to zero, an even deadlier version of the same tactic. Social media is the same story. You think you're choosing between platforms, but Meta owns Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. Different apps, same parent. Horizontal consolidation disguised as variety. The illusion of choice packaged as convenience. Healthcare. The system is almost entirely built on Rockefeller's educational and regulatory infrastructure. You see doctors trained in a model his foundation designed. You take medications produced by companies using patent systems sculpted by Rockefeller-era laws. You pay insurance premiums filtered through holding company structures lifted directly from the Standard Oil playbook. Every step down the chain, the system collects. Add the numbers up. The average American spends roughly $4,000 a year on gasoline, another $3,000 on Amazon purchases, $5,000 on healthcare costs not covered by insurance, and about $4,200 on internet and technology services. Add it together, nearly $13,200 per year flowing into companies built on Rockefeller's system. Over a lifetime, that's over $660,000, a mortgage-sized transfer of wealth, not to small businesses or innovators, but to entrenched corporations using 150-year-old tactics. And here's the trap. You can't opt out. You could bike everywhere, but you still interact with supply chains built on oil. You could boycott Amazon, but the alternatives depend on the same logistics model Amazon perfected. You could avoid Google, but no competitor comes close to its search efficiency. You could refuse pharmaceuticals, but licensing systems make alternatives inaccessible. You can try to resist, but the system is the water you swim in. It's not an obstacle. It's the environment. And this is where people misunderstand Rockefeller. They think his legacy is villainy, or greed, or ruthless ambition. But the real legacy, the part that survived the man, is the efficiency. Vertical integration lowers prices. Horizontal consolidation reduces chaos. Regulatory capture stabilizes industries. Foundations fund research that government never touches. The system works. Consumers get cheaper products, faster shipping, more reliable energy, better medicine, and at the same time, Rockefeller's heirs, both biological and ideological, accumulate more wealth than any free market would ever allow. It's a duality most people can't emotionally reconcile. They want to believe monopolies are always bad. They want to believe competition is always good. Rockefeller didn't see the world that way. He famously said, "Competition is a sin," and people assumed he meant it as an expression of greed. What he actually meant was philosophical. Competition destroys capital. It wastes labor, fragments supply chains, duplicates infrastructure. In Rockefeller's worldview, monopoly was the natural endpoint of efficiency. And 150 years later, nearly every major industry has followed him to that endpoint. 3 to 5 companies, dominating everything. So what do you do when you live inside a system you can't escape? You really have 3 choices. Option 1, accept it. Recognize that consolidation is the natural evolution of capitalism. Use the efficiencies it provides. Save money, save time, benefit from the convenience. Option 2, resist it. Support antitrust laws. Choose small businesses when possible. Vote for politicians who want to fracture the giants. It's noble, but it's exhausting, and the system has 100 years of structural momentum behind it. Option 3, understand the system and position yourself within it. If you can't escape the extractors, own them. Buy shares in the companies doing the extracting. Amazon, Google, Exxon, Chevron, Pfizer, JP Morgan. Rockefeller didn't just build the system. He profited by sitting on top of it. You can't replicate his scale, but you can replicate his logic. That's not investment advice. It's historical pattern recognition. The system has concentrated wealth for 150 years. It will continue doing so because the laws, tax codes, and regulatory bodies are built on its foundation. Escaping it is fantasy. Ignoring it is dangerous. Understanding it is survival. Rockefeller lived to be 97. He watched his empire break apart, then watched the pieces grow stronger. He watched his foundations reshape medicine and education. He watched his descendants rise in finance and global policy. And when he died in 1937, the system didn't weaken. It matured. What he built wasn't Standard Oil. It was the method, a method that now governs steel, railroads, automobiles, electronics, pharmaceuticals, tech, banking, everything. And every year, fewer companies control more of the economy. Every year, the walls of the system grow taller. Every year, the escape routes narrow. You can't exit it, but you can see it. And once you see the system, you understand the world you actually live in.